Welcome back to the MNSRC podcast. We are back this month with a look at one of the game's true cancers, Dissent. Managing Dissent was listed as a priority by the Federation at this year's regional training seminars, so we are passing along the details along with the usual collection of video examples to help you better understand what Dissent is and how and when to deal with it. One of the great things about this topic is that the same behaviors can be applied across every level of the game. Back in 2009, Brian Hall and U.S. Soccer published a directive on Dissent that, while no longer recognized as current documentation by U.S. Soccer, still summarizes the concepts of dealing with dissent using terms and recommendations that remain effective even now, 5 years later. The hallmarks of this directive include: dissent can be both verbal and visual. It must be dealt with because it erodes the authority of the referee and reduces the enjoyment of the game by both other players and spectators, and can easily spread when the referee attempts to ignore it. The directive further noted that it is not uncommon for players to use foul language while dissenting, but the referee must decide whether his or her response to the dissent requires a verbal warning, a caution, or even a send-off, depending on the context of the language in which it was used. Dissent is evaluated and responded to based on what are widely known as the 3 Ps. Public: are the player's actions or comments observable or audible to other players, substitutes, or spectators? The more public the dissent, the greater the need for the referee to deal with it using more formal action. Personal: the referee must decide if the dissent is a general display of frustration or a more personal attack against any member of the referee crew. Gestures or body language might be suggesting a more personal targeting of a referee crew member, which again requires a more formal or focused response from the referee to deal with the dissent. And then provocative: is the dissent designed to raise the match temperature, incite further misconduct from the dissenting player or his or her teammates, and potentially provoke further conflict of other types? If the content of the dissent includes language or gestures that could be considered racial, ethnic, or discrimination of a gender-biased nature, then that dissent crosses a boundary and moves into the territory of offensive language. Now, having covered this directive in brief, let's start with the pro stuff and work our way down. Our first clip this month looks at an incident from a 2013 MLS match between the LA Galaxy and Montreal Impact.
88th minute, Galaxy up 1-0. Trying desperately to get that second one, and Robbie Keane's offside. No, he says no way. Bruce Arena can't believe it either. Hey, come on, I just got off a plane this afternoon from Dublin. Give me a break.
The video does not show clearly if Robbie Keane is offside or not, but as we suggested with our introduction, that's not the focal point of this clip. The problem is Keane's reaction to the offside call by the assistant referee. Keane can be seen yelling at the AR and waving his arms, showing public, albeit mild, dissent. However, his agitation escalates, and he eventually uses his hands to make goggles around his eyes. The goggles action is a public and visual insult to the eyesight and decision-making of the assistant. This is the exact type of behavior that can erode the authority of the referee crew, and therefore it must be dealt with. The referee and assistant referee have options here, depending on the temperature of the match, the amount of time played, the behavior of the dissenting player to that point, including whether he has been previously talked to, and what we know about the dissenting player's personality and the severity of the actions of the dissenting player. But choosing to ignore this blatantly disrespectful and public act is not an option. This must be dealt with in some manner. The recommendation of U.S. Soccer and the Minnesota State Referee Committee for this situation is to issue a caution for dissent. Doing so will send a clear message to all players on the field that this behavior will not be tolerated. Just because this happens in the 89th minute does not mean that we can shrug it off and ignore it. If not punished, you have 22 players on the field and another 12 on the benches that all think this is tolerable behavior, both for this game and going forward. There are rare circumstances where a referee may choose to only talk to the player or engage the player's captain to issue a heavy warning. But please understand that such a course of action requires a referee with high levels of man management experience, a strong personality, and, in most cases, pre-existing experience with the player involved. For the vast majority of us, this publicly insulting action directed towards an assistant should result in a caution. Don't try to talk yourself out of this unless you have a lot of experience with the guilty player and understand how you will have to control both that player and the game after the fact. What happens when it's a coach who publicly decides to insult the referee? Let's look at this clip from an FC Dallas-Colorado match in 2012.
And sees an extended time on the sidelines. But I think my argument back to that point was, even with those 8 ties, what that tells me is there is a ton of fight and a ton of grit in that group, in that locker room last year. And I think it's a lot to build on.
Here we see the same goggles action, this time directed at the referee, but by Colorado head coach Oscar Pereja standing in his technical area. Pereja is animated and, as with Robbie Keane in the first clip, makes a publicly insulting gesture. Now, the difference here is that this behavior is by a coach in the technical area. Remember, we can't card coaches, so the question then becomes, is this irresponsible behavior by a team official? Minnesota observers of this podcast should know the answer to that question. Coaches have a shorter leash than players, and referees should have a much lower tolerance level for this kind of behavior when it comes from a coach. This is irresponsible behavior, and the coach, Pereja, should be dismissed from the match. No warnings, no tell here. Straight dismissal. If you are an assistant referee or fourth official and observe this, you should get the referee's attention at the next stoppage. Remember, it's your job to assist, not insist. So, you report to the referee what the coach was doing, and then allow the referee to decide how to handle it. Ideally, we would like all referees to dismiss the coach here, but the assistant should not impose his or her opinion on the referee. Inform the referee what the coach was doing. If the referee asks for advice on a response, then you can tell the referee the coach should be dismissed. But remember, the final decision lies with the referee. Dissent is clearly a volatile situation, and a common problem is to try to figure out when a player might cross the line from dissent to foul or abusive language. Let's have a look at an incident from a San Jose FC Dallas match that happened last year. This clip is a bit extended, so you can see the lead up to the dissent and the reason for it.
Good step from Victor Bernardes. Foul called, and Kenny Cooper up and right in the face of Victor Bernardes. That's got to be a red card. You see Rafael Baca just pleading with the referee. How is that not a red card? That's a retaliation. Well, Kenny Cooper got right up in the face of Victor Bernardes, and Baldomero Toledo has had his hands full here tonight. Well, strong step from Victor Bernardes. Cooper jumps up quickly. To me, there's no question. And have they pulled red? I don't know why Clarence Goodson is arguing here. Let's see if we can get this sorted out. There was a card out. This one has gotten away from Baldomero Toledo. There's no doubt. A match that was not overly physical. Well, the referee is not supposed to have too big of an influence on the game, and he surely has tonight. Well, watch it again. Bernardes appears to maybe accidentally step on Kenny Cooper at the tail end here. And he gets up in the face of Bernardes. Well, we're trying to sort this out here from Frisco, Texas. This has turned into a wild one. Well, it looks as though that man right there, Kenny Cooper, will get his marching orders, as well as the Earthquakes' Victor Bernardes. I don't know how Victor Bernardes gets a red card. It appeared at the tail end of the challenge that he might have gotten a piece of Kenny Cooper. The Earthquakes will make their final substitution here. It'll be Jason Hernandez coming on. Hernandez just shy of his 30th birthday. Rafael Baca, who was literally on hands and knees pleading for the red card, and he got it. But Victor Bernard...
There's a lot going on in this clip, and yes, the match temperature is somewhere in the range of on fire here. We get a bad foul by San Jose's Victor Bernardez from behind on Dallas's Kenny Cooper. The foul by itself is probably cautionable, but then Bernardez stomps on Cooper while he's lying on the ground. Now, before you start to say, wait a minute, let's just get something clear here, that stomp was not an accident. Bernardez has options when Cooper ends up underneath him, but he decides to step over Cooper instead of being careful or apologetic from the get-go. Cooper naturally takes offense, pops up, and grabs Bernardez's jersey and then pushes him over, helped in part by some theatrics from Bernardez. Both players are guilty of violent conduct and both are appropriately sent off. Of course, Cooper's probably the only player on the field who knows Bernardez stomped on him. Fortunately, assistant referee Greg Barkey saw it as well, which is why Bernardez gets his walking papers. But we have to be aware at this time that emotions, especially from San Jose players who thought they were about to see Dallas go a man down, are high. As all of this is going on, San Jose's Jason Hernandez was actually at the halfway line waiting to substitute into the match. After the red cards are sorted out, Hernandez starts to enter the field before the player he is substituting for, Rafael Baca, has left. The fourth official gets Hernandez to return to the touchline, but as he does so, he mouths a fairly clear obscenity, the sound censored here because, hey, we're a family-friendly podcast. It's directed at the fourth official. Okay, so Hernandez is clearly guilty of dissent here, but we know what you're thinking. Grown-ups say bad words sometimes in the heat of battle. Well, we've got news for you. Improperly entering the field without permission, then being ordered back to the touchline to conduct the substitution properly, and then getting upset about that let-off, which, by the way, could be cautionable, and telling the fourth official to do something explicit, that's not acceptable behavior. Not in MLS, not anywhere. U.S. Soccer wants Hernandez sent off here for foul and abusive language. We know we have this volatile situation with two players already just sent off. And, oh, by the way, San Jose had another player sent off 5 minutes earlier. So at this point, we've had 3 red cards in 5 minutes. Do we really want to kick another San Jose player out? Well, yes, we do. None of the send-offs to this point have had anything to do with the fourth official. So, exactly why does Hernandez need to tell him, you? Since when does 2 red cards to teammates now give a player license to speak to a member of the referee crew like that? It's not our problem Hernandez can't control his emotions. And we say this with all due respect, but he's the one making the stupid decision here. Make a dumb choice, deal with the consequences. However, we also need to point out that Hernandez being sent off is not going to change the number of players on the field. He has not officially replaced Baca when he insults the fourth official. Therefore, he is a substitute being sent off, not a player, and his dismissal will not force San Jose to play another man short. Lucky them, they would still have 9 on the field. And again, much like that last clip, the fourth official should simply call the referee over before allowing the substitution and fill him in on what Hernandez said. Then leave it to the referee to pull the trigger on red card number 4 of this match. The take-home lesson here, don't back away from doing what the game needs. Just because a player thinks that, for some reason, you have some sort of cap on how many cards you can give. The minute you give them that license, things are not going to get easier for you. Our next clip is actually from the World Cup final in South Africa in 2010, featuring Spain's winning goal in extra time. A pretty goal, but let's focus on the aftermath created by the Dutch players, who, as we all know, really set themselves a high standard for moral behavior in this game. Come to think of it, in the last 2 World Cups, the Dutch in their knockout round losses have combined for a total of 13 yellows and 3 reds. And that doesn't even consider that 3 of those yellows should have been straight reds. If Mark Geiger gets into the knockout stages in Brazil, let's hope he doesn't draw the Dutch.
It drops for Fabregas, who looks for Iniesta, who's onside! Spain score! They take advantage of the extra man, and they believe they're going to win the World Cup for the very first time. Robin left to rue his misses. And Del Bosque calls for calm. A question about offside.
I think what they're complaining about more, Martin, is the supposed foul on Elliot on the edge of the box. They felt he was caught in a sandwich, and the Spaniards broke, and that's the end result.
That's another yellow card, Matthijssen. And if he keeps going, it'll be yellow to red.
After Spain scores what turns out to be the match winner, several Dutch defenders confront the assistant referee to try to coerce him into calling Andres Iniesta offside, which is, of course, ludicrous. Joris Matthijssen loses his patience when referee Howard Webb chases him away and spikes the ball angrily. Webb cautions him for dissent, as the action is public and inflammatory, just as Webb should have. And even though the Dutch have already received 7 prior yellow cards and a red in this match, it doesn't matter that there have been so many cards. It doesn't matter that there's only 4 minutes left. Matthijssen must be booked for this display. However, as Webb walks away and as Matthijssen angrily retreats, we see Matthijssen turn and curse at Webb using the same phrase Jason Hernandez did in the San Jose clip. Emotional situation or not, this is foul and abusive language. Matthijssen should have received a straight red for his further comment, and the Dutch would have been forced to finish the game with 9 men, which, by the way, is 2 more than they should have finished with anyway, so they could consider themselves lucky. Again, players must respect the officials, and public displays of dissent must be dealt with. Public use of directed, foul, or abusive language is not permissible even on the world's biggest stage. The player is responsible for acting appropriately. Yes, the referee might be criticized for not having thick skin, but the referee doesn't have to make the decision here if the player simply controls himself. Remember, the player is the one who forces the decision. Our last clip now looks at dissent in a youth match from last summer's MYSA Summer Championships. Was there a handling offense there? It sure looks like it. But if the referee doesn't call it, that does not then give a player the right to publicly dissent and undermine the referee's authority over the match. And unfortunately, this player chooses to use profanity when he screams at the official. Unlike the prior clips, the profanity here could be arguably called non-directed. The player says, "How the is that not a handball?" rather than "you," like Matthijssen and Hernandez in the prior clips. Unfortunately for this player, though, this is a youth match, and public use of profanity is absolutely not okay. This game isn't for entertainment. These are not paid players playing before a ticket-buying audience who want to see a good show. There's younger brothers and sisters on the touchline that all heard what this player said, and it's crucial for the referee to send an appropriate message that this behavior is not tolerable in the youth game. The send-off is 100% correct for this level of play. Dissent is a tricky subject, and we can assure you that there is no cut and paste or black and white method to dealing with it. If you stay in the game long enough as a referee, you will begin to employ a wide collection of tools to deal with dissent, many of which will not involve the use of cards. But the examples that we provided in this podcast should all have resulted in cards from the vast majority of referees. And as we even pointed out in the professional clips, yes, even the pros need to be cautioned or sent off when they decide to cross the line. Disagreement does not equal disrespect.